Right, we are live. Should we start?
Yes, we can start. Yes. Okay. Do I have the presentation rights? Not yet.
Yeah, I'll.
Yeah, please.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening episode of Pursue. This is Pursue 13G, which is head and neck pathology. We are streaming live from TMH Mumbai via Kolkata. And we have a very interesting topic, which is the role of IHC in head and neck tumors. And to talk on that, we have somebody who's an expert in head and neck pathology, Dr. Neha Mittal, who is an MD, PGI Chandigarh, DNB, PDCC. She is a consultant pathology in Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. And her area of interest is head and neck pathology, gynae pathology, encompassing the histopathological, cytological, molecular, and digital pathology work in these fields. She has done her residency training from PGI Chandigarh. Presently, she is also the academic in charge of MD Pathology residency program at Tata Memorial Hospital, with multiple national and international presentations and publications, including book chapters. Before I ask ma'am to start, let me request all of you to please keep your mic muted, your camera off, and please don't share your screen. With this, let me request Dr. Neha Mittal ma'am, please share your screen and let's start. Thank you.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Is my screen visible?
Yeah, please make it for the first slide.
Yes, yes. And am I audible?
Absolutely clear, yeah. Please start.
Okay, thank you. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizer, especially Dr. Nadeep, for giving me this opportunity to present in this wonderful program and on a topic which is very, very close to my heart, which is immunohistochemistry in head and neck tumors. This is just a disclaimer to say that some non-pathology pictures in this presentation have been taken from the internet. The pathology pictures in this presentation are entirely from the cases that were reported at Tata Hospital. So what is immunohistochemistry? I don't think I need to introduce immunohistochemistry to this August gathering, but still, just to begin, this is a method that uses antibodies to identify, locate, and stain specific protein molecules. We have to remember immunohistochemistry is just the protein expression in tissue sections. But actually, in reality, we all pathologists know, and it's a little secret, that IHC is our greater wand. It is our magical tool. And nowadays, it's like, gone are the days when immunohistochemistry was just a diagnostic test. There has been a rebirth of immunohistochemistry. And that rebirth is in the form of a prognostic, predictive, and molecular phase of immunohistochemistry. And that is why immunohistochemistry these days is more demanding, more challenging, with many new molecules coming up in the market. And that actually makes it more prone to errors as well. That is one point have to be kept in mind. Similar role of immunohistochemistry is in head and neck tumors, and head and neck has seen a similar surge of immunohistochemical markers. And also we must understand that owing to the complex anatomic structures of head and neck, we see a large varieties of tumors in head and neck region. In fact, sinonasal region has the maximum variety of tumors per square inch of tissue that there is when we consider tumors all over the body. In addition, immunohistochemistry in head and neck has a diagnostic, prognostic, and predictive role. Most of these roles are new because traditionally head and neck has always been thought to be the squamous carcinoma region. But now we know that a lot of host of other tumors are being diagnosed in head and neck region. So as I said, head and neck has traditionally been known as the squamous differentiation region or the squamous carcinoma region. And let me just warn you here that, for other DMGs or for other subsites or for other organs, it's easy for the pathologist reporting those kinds of places because squamous differentiation there actually equates to squamous carcinomas. However, for head and neck pathologists, squamous differentiation or squamoid histology in head and neck, besides being a tongue twister, is also a long list of brain teasers. And that is why squamous differentiation and squamoid histology in head and neck is not equal to squamous carcinomas. And Rest assured, I will give you pertinent examples which are very, very interesting. However, we all should always remember that 60 to 70% of squamous carcinomas in head and neck region are morphologically diagnosable, and there is no need of immunohistochemistry to diagnose their lesions. At the same time, the rest of the squamous carcinomas, 5-50% at least, are ones which hardly anybody can diagnose. There is a saying in our head neck pathologists that if a squamous carcinoma doesn't want to be diagnosed, you cannot just diagnose it. It will not let you diagnose it. Also, many head neck tumors tend to be misdiagnosed as squamous carcinomas, as I just said, as they show squamous differentiation or squamoid histology. So let me start with not one but 6 cases. Just look at these pictures. So you have a 50-year-old male upper alveolar tumor. You see very nice squamous, keratinizing squamous differentiation and islands of infiltrative tumor. 50-year-old lady, upper alveolus, again very nice keratinizing squamous histology and some islands of tumor here and there. 50-year-old lady with a tongue mass and a very squamoid appearing tumor, very likely to be in a small biopsy. This kind of a squamoid appearance, what else could it be? Why not a squamous carcinoma? Again, 50-year-old male upper alveolus, obvious keratinization with sheets of tumor cells. Yes, moderate poor differentiation are known in squamous carcinoma. So is this also a squamous carcinoma? Yet another case, 50-year-old male upper alveolus, extensive clear cells, squamoid appearing tumor with islands of infiltrating tumor into the underlying stroma. And 50-year-old lady with the tongue mass, very irregular appearing squamous islands and squamous mucosa with keratinization, and there are some these sharp tongues which are present within the underlying stroma, and the underlying stroma also looks fibrotic. So is it also a squamous carcinoma? Is it a well differentiated squamous carcinoma? Is this infiltrative? So are these all squamous carcinoma? Are one of them a squamous carcinoma? Are 3 of them squamous carcinomas? Let's see what these cases are actually. So let's start with the second case. 50-year-old male, upper alveolus. As I said, squamous differentiation. Look closely. There is definitely a beautiful keratinization and squamous differentiation. But what you see here are actually cells which are present in these kind of cords, or in, you can see these cords, or probably in, as you can see, glandular type of arrangements. There is a proliferation of cells which at places at least appears biphasic. You have these cords, and there are some flattened cells which are present outside of these cords, but definitely not very easy to make out. And that is when you have this differential in a small biopsy, obvious keratinization, but you see very bland cells which appear to be in cords at places, and some places at least there is a suspicion for a biphasic histology that you resort to immunohistochemistry. And you see that CK7 is brilliantly positive in these islands. We all know that head and neck squamous carcinomas, the oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas are usually CK7 negative. They can be positive. This is not an absolute thing, but they're usually negative. And this is brilliantly positive for CK7. There is no atypia to say, to call it an obvious malignancy. And what is this? This is P40, or the myoepithelial marker, which demonstrates the beautiful biphasic pattern in this tumor. So this is not a CK7 positive and P40 diffuse positive tumor. Here you see the P40 positivity only in the abluminal component. So this is a pleomorphic adenoma of the minor salivary gland with squamous differentiation. A very important and a very dangerous pitfall on small biopsies. Please be aware of it and look at your cases very clearly. The symptom of malignancy in squamous carcinoma does not change, and it remains 2 things. That is dyskeratosis and atypical mitosis. Without the presence of these 2, be very wary of what you're looking at and look and think of differential diagnosis. Okay, next case, the 50-year-old lady, tongue mass, very squamoid appearing islands, as I said, and infiltrating into the underlying stroma. And when you see case was resected, But and also just in the biopsy, I would like to point out that the underlying stroma has a very pink and hyaline quality in this tumor. So nonetheless, this tumor, when it was resected, it is showing that the overlying mucosa, we know that squamous carcinomas are mucosal tumors, but this overlying mucosa is completely normal, and the entire tumor seems to be sitting in the submucosal region, is very well circumscribed. Why would you expect a squamous carcinoma, which is a high-grade malignancy, to be this well circumscribed? As you saw here on the high power, there was no obvious squamous differentiation, and there is this cuff of lymphoid tissue, these blue cells at the periphery of this tumor, and some central pink region, like you would see some scarring in an oncocytoma, something like that. And a closer power to see these diagnostic cords of very banal, very monocytic cells with this hyaline stroma in between. Some places it has these clear cells, some places clear cells are more, at other places you hardly see any clearing. There is a lymphoid infiltrate at the periphery, the tumor is relatively well circumscribed. There may be a prominent myxoid change, making it look like a pleomorphic adenoma or a myoepithelial tumor, which is definitely a differential. And I said this beautiful hyaline stroma, which at places appears like amyloid. It is pink, it is eosinophilic, it is hyaline. But if you do a PAS, this will be positive because this is actually collagen and not amyloid. And this is what the immunohistochemistry will help you, come closer to your diagnosis, which is CK7 again is brilliantly positive. You see the overlying mucosa here is negative, but the tumor is brilliantly positive and also demonstrates the circumscribed nature of this tumor. Diffusely positive for P63, which is again a squamous marker, and that is why a big pitfall in a small biopsy. If you only rely on the squamous markers, then that will not help you in this case. Actually, what will help you in this case is the Ki67 or the proliferation index. And you see the proliferation of this index of this tumor is hardly 2%. And squamous carcinoma, however bland, will have a Ki67 this low. So what is this tumor? Hyaline matrix, squamoid islands at places, lot of clear cells, submucosal in origin, base of tongue, minor salivary gland, and positive for squamous markers. This is the clear cell carcinoma of minor salivary glands, which is a tumor which happens in minor salivary glands. It is rare, but it is a big mimicker of squamous carcinoma on small biopsies. Is it important to differentiate? You saw that both are being resected. Yes, it is important to differentiate because squamous carcinoma this happens mostly in base of tongue. So squamous carcinomas of the oropharynx or oropharyngeal region will be treated with CTRT, whereas this tumor requires surgery as the management. Moreover, oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas usually present with neck nodal metastasis and will undergo neck nodal dissection upfront. Whereas this tumor is a low-grade minor salivary gland tumor, and there is no need of addressing the neck unless the patient has clinically positive nodes, which can happen in 20%, 15 to 20% of these cases. And that is why this distinction is absolutely pertinent to make on a small biopsy as well. Coming to case number D, as I said again, we have this here, and in this case, hyalinizing clear cell, please note, has no overt keratinization, never. It will not have overt keratinization. Vis-a-vis this tumor, which was showing you even on low power, multiple areas of overt keratinization. On higher power, a myxoid change, which you also saw in hyalinizing clear cell, but no keratin in the hyalinizing. And the stroma myxoid, hyaline, again, this matrix-like quality in this. And then, of course, again, it is positive for P63, which you have to remember in head and neck region is not only a marker of squamous differentiation, but also of myoepithelial differentiation or of abluminal differentiation. And that is what this case is. It is diffusely and brilliantly S100 positive as well, and it was SOX10 positive as well, which is the new marker for myoepithelial tumors and is a very good and a very sensitive marker for all myoepithelial tumors, though is being reported in a host of other salivary gland tumors as well. And that is why this was a myoepithelial carcinoma with squamous differentiation. Coming to case E, 50-year-old male, upper alveolus. You saw these islands, very squamoid-looking islands with pink cells and clear cells, and some of these islands were seen infiltrating. We just saw a case like that. Maybe this is hyalinizing clear cell because it has clear cells. But please wait, let's have a closer look. Yes, you have abundance of clear cells. But with the clear cells, there are also these cells which are very squamoid, which are very epidermoid in appearance. And this combination, and then when you look hard, you will also find the mucus containing cells or the mucin containing cells in these kind of tumors. You see the clearing in the clear cell areas, and this is positive for CK7, P63. Same squamous markers will be positive in all the three that I showed you: hyalinizing clear cell, myoepithelial, and this tumor. However, mucin stain is positive in this tumor, which will be negative in myoepithelial and hyalinizing clear cell or clear cell carcinoma of salivary glands. The mucin is brilliantly positive in this tumor. So this, with its combination of mucin producing cell, mucin positive cells, bland appearance, clear cells, and epidermoid or squamoid cells, is a clear cell mucoepidermoid carcinoma of the minor salivary glands. How to differentiate? In a small biopsy, as you can see, they can look remarkably similar. There are points which can help you. So as I said, clear cell carcinoma, there are clear cells, hyalinization and cords. You will not see hyalinization with cords infiltrating in between in any other of these tumors, neither in clear cell myoepithelial, which happens in sheets or is multinodular, or in clear cell mucoepidermoid, which happens in sheets with infiltrative clusters at the margin but do not have the hyalinization. Then the epithelial and squamous markers are positive in all three of them, as I highlighted before. SOX10 and Vimentin are negative in clear cell carcinoma always. And SOX10 and Vimentin are positive in clear cell myoepithelial. So these are the two markers. If you have SOX10, well and good. Vimentin works equally well. So clear cell carcinoma is never positive for Vimentin, whereas myoep is almost always positive for Vimentin because of its abluminal differentiation. Whereas SOX10 and Vimentin are negative in most mucoepidermoid carcinomas as well. So these are the two immunohistochemical markers which will help you differentiate clear cell carcinoma and clear cell myoepithelium. However, the molecular signature of clear cell carcinoma or the hyalinizing clear cell carcinoma is the EWSR gene rearrangement. That will not help you differentiate it from clear cell myoepithelial, which also shows EWSR1 gene rearrangement in a significant percentage of cases. But this is what is going to help you. The EWSR1 is going to help you differentiate it from clear cell mucoepidermoid carcinoma, which is never EWSR1 gene rearranged and shows MAML2 gene rearrangements. So if you have to differentiate clear cell carcinoma and clear cell myoepithelial, immunohistochemistry is your best bet. Whereas clear cell carcinoma and clear cell mucoepidermoid start with mucin stain, mucin positivity rules out clear cell carcinoma of the minor salivary glands. If mucin is not able to help you, then you will have to sequentially go to other markers and probably end at EWSR1 gene rearrangement or MAML2 fish gene rearrangement depending on the availability. Then coming to this very interesting case, the last one, 50-year-old male tongue mass. Why have I shown these? So these are tongues and tongues. These are sharp tongues of squamous projection which appear to be infiltrated in the underlying stroma, and the stroma appears very fibrotic, making it appear on low power as if there is a desmoplastic appearance to these islands or appearance to the stroma, and probably these islands are infiltrative. But you see the nice palisading at the present in the islands, and there is no definite infiltration into the underlying stroma. There is no definite desmoplasia. This is just fibrosis, and these tongues are interconnected, and they are in the form of these small tongues of interconnected basaloid appearing cells which are totally bland and have no mitosis or there is no necrosis, and these are still connected to the surface. These are typical hallmarks of pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia. So this is a case of pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia. But why am I showing a pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia case in a IHC in head and neck cancers? or I'd seen head and neck tumor lecture, because the reason for the pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia is also sitting just below it. And if you do not think about it, you're going to miss it. And look at these cells, and this is what it is. This is the beautiful pseudoepitheliomatous tumor, which this tumor notoriously generates, and is known for this diffuse fibrosis in the underlying stroma. You will never see this kind of a fibrosis in a normal tongue. So this is a tongue lesion, and this kind of fibrosis should warrant further markers, further a deeper biopsy. In this case, we asked for a deeper biopsy. The superficial biopsy did not have these cells, just had the pseudoepitheliomatous proliferation. And these are the cells that we are looking at. Very bland nuclei with a fine nucleolus and abundant amount of granular cytoplasm, and that is what gives it its name. So this is a case of granular cell tumor with pseudoepitheliomatous hyperplasia, and as you can see in the picture, it is brilliantly positive for S100. Coming to another case, and what does this? Now we've come, so I've shown you some mimics of squamous carcinoma in the head and neck region, which show you obvious squamous differentiation or are squamoid or very, very squamoid in appearance, and the role of immunohistochemistry in diagnosing those lesions. I could go subsite wise, or I could divide my cases into sites, but that is now not how cases are received on our table. The cases don't come and say that, okay, I'm from the minor salivary gland, go, give your differentials, think about whatever I am. The cases will come, according to the site, and at every site in head and neck, you have such a big host of tissues, normal tissues, and tumors can arise from everywhere. So the idea was to give you a practical approach of what all can look like squamous carcinomas. And now what I'm going to tell you is about a squamous carcinoma, which does not want to be called a squamous carcinoma, which does not let you call it a squamous carcinoma, and you look at it and yet think of other things in your mind, and last, when you rule out everything, and then you're coming back to a squamous carcinoma, because then there is no other tissue or no other subsite or nothing is left, and then you kind of use it as a diagnosis of exclusion. So this is what it is. 70-year-old male, chronic smoker, ulceroproliferative growth in the right buccal mucosa with infiltration into the underlying mandibular bone. A very classical history for a squamous carcinoma of the oral cavity. But look at the histology. Now what is this? These are just sheets and sheets of spindle cells with some hyalinization, some stroma in between. At places you can see that some nuclei appear more darker, and some appear a little bigger in this power. So there is some amount of pleomorphism, but most of these cells appear to have a very eosinophilic cytoplasm. Looking at this tumor, you can think of so many things but a squamous carcinoma. You can think that whether it's a granulation, can it be a granulation tissue, can it be some sarcoma, depending on the high power features. Are there mitoses, is there necrosis, and is it a sarcoma, or is it any of the other salivary gland tumors which can have a spindle cell histology? Could it be myoepithelial? So these are all the differential diagnoses which will come to your mind. And this is what, these are 4 pictures to show you that what are these tumors, what these tumors can look like, and what all can they mimic. So as I said, spindle to epithelioid cells. Here also spindle to epithelioid cells with lot of inflammatory infiltrate in between, looking like granulation. This is looking like granulation tissue. And again a sheet of these epithelioid to spindle cells. What is this? And again a sheet of epithelioid to spindle cells, all of them in buccal mucosa, all of them in this around the same age. All of these squamous carcinomas, if we are thinking in terms of history and saying that, okay, this can't be anything, 70-year-old male ulceroproliferative lesion in the buccal mucosa, he's a smoker, then are all of these with similar history also squamous carcinomas, or is there a way to differentiate the usual mimics of a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma in a biopsy or even in a resection? So these are all mimics of squamous carcinoma, sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma, and we'll see how to arrive at the diagnosis of sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma, what will help you. So coming to the first case, which is showing these spindle cells, we see that A1, A3 and P40 is positive in this case. And I would just say that we were lucky to have the A1, A3 and P40 positive. And if they are positive, yes, you can definitely call them sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas, considering the history. And of course, you have to rule out, maybe you have to, again, as I said, the previous, myoepithelial and all those will still be your issues. However, the other things will help you in diagnosing a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma are P53 mutations. So upwards of 80% of sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas will show you P53 mutations. They are always vimentin positive. There is an epithelial to mesenchymal transition, and the mesenchymal transition is positive for vimentin. So that is why sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas are positive for vimentin. SAT-B2, I'll talk about it in the next case, and then I will discuss the differential. So this first case definitely is a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma. What is this? As it looks like, and this sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas can also look similar, are these epithelioid looking cells with lot of inflammation and some vascular proliferation. These epithelioid cells were actually the epithelioid endothelial cells which were looking epithelioid, and this is simply granulation tissue. A1, A3, P40 will be negative, which will also be negative in upwards of 50% of sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas. So that might not help much. But P53 will never be mutated in these kind of granulation tissues, and that is why that is one very important immunohistochemical marker that will help you. And the third picture that we saw, this picture which also showed you these sheets of epithelioid appearing cells and spindle cells with some stoma between. Actually, in another focus showed beautiful tumor osteoid production, and you can see the brilliantly positive SAT-B2, which is a new marker thought to be very specific for osseous differentiation and colorectal carcinomas. But let me warn you, the sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas, and this is our experience also and has been mentioned in very few publications, that the sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas which lose the epithelial markers, that is A1, A3 and P40 are negative, are showing SAT-B2 positivity. So there, the epithelial to mesenchymal transition in these sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas is eliciting some kind of I won't be able to call it osseous differentiation. I have no way to prove it, but it gives a myofibroblastic phenotype, which is also positive for SAT-B2. SAT-B2 is also positive in myofibroblastic tumors, and this tumor, we have the tumor osteoid, and SAT-B2 is also positive. So yes, this is an OGS, or the osteogenic sarcoma, high-grade osteogenic sarcoma of the head and neck region, which in small biopsy, being a mucosal, in head and neck region being a mucosal, can appear like a mucosal tumor with infiltration of the underlying bone and must be differentiated from sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas. Please be aware that P53 mutation will also be positive in these osteogenic sarcomas. Vimentin will also be positive in these cases, and that is why this differential diagnosis between sarcomatoid squamous and a high-grade osteogenic sarcoma in this region either rests on morphological finding of osteoid, which is usually not there in a small biopsy, or on clinico-radiological aspects of the tumor, mucosa based mainly, with some infiltration of the underlying bone, vis-a-vis a primary bone tumor with overlying mucosa getting stretched and ulcerated. So it is very important to pick up your phone and talk to your clinician and radiologist when you are trying to differentiate these two entities. To complicate matters now, because of increased survivals of cancer patients, we see secondary tumors arising in them. So we've had a couple of sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma patients who stayed for years and then presented with secondary osteogenic sarcomas due to radiation. And in that situation, especially when you have a known case of sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma, then to think of osteogenic sarcoma as a secondary malignancy arising can be very, very challenging. And that is why clinico-radiological inputs are imperative to diagnose, to differentiate between these entities in these situations. This third is again showing you epithelioid to spindle cells and sheets with no obvious differentiation of any sort, and some just some tissue or matrix, and no, actually not matrix, just lying in the underlying stroma is showing brilliant HMB45 positivity. So, and this case was S100 negative, and I specifically chose this case to tell you that it is now known that oral mucosal as well as sinonasal, and more so sinonasal melanomas may be S100 negative, and to a large extent, or to in large numbers, and that is why doing S100 alone may not suffice to diagnose melanoma in these subsites. Consider the importance of diagnosing this entity. We should use at least 2 markers to diagnose a melanoma: S100 as well as HMB45, Melanase, MART1 or SOX10. SOX10 is also a marker of melanocytic differentiation and can be used to diagnose a melanoma. As I said, S100 can be negative, HMB45, Melanase, SOX10 is positive. Keratins may be positive. So that is a pitfall. We all know melanomas can look like anything and can also have IHC like anything. So keratins may also be positive. And these are the 4 main differentials that you must keep in your mind when you are encountered with a mucosa-based spindle cell lesion, and must try to work your differentials through this using these immunohistochemical markers and morphological findings in each case. It starts with morphology and then you confirm. And each and every case where you're thinking of sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas, nowadays we are using a panel, and that panel has helped us pick up these cases. And that panel consists of A1, A3, P40, P53, and Vimentin, and S100, and SADB2. So these are the markers that we use to try and differentiate all these 4 differential diagnosis and come to the correct diagnosis, of course with clinical and radiological inputs. So this is just another case of sarcomatoid squamous carcinomas. You can see how myoid, or how muscle-like, or how myoid, or how like a leiomyosarcoma this tumor may look at times. Morphological finding of atypical mitosis is the most important clue to the lesion being malignant, especially when your differential is between a granulation tissue or a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma, and it does happen. See, this is an example of a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma, and previously I showed you that picture of a granulation tissue, and they look remarkably similar. And that when this is your differential, atypical mitosis will immediately take it out of the granulation tissue category, of the benign category. You cannot have atypical mitosis in those, and this tripolar mitosis tells you that this is a malignant lesion. And then comes your immunohistochemistry. This case you see is A1, A3 and P40 negative, and P53 is diffuse positive or mutation phenotype, indicating that this is supporting the fact that this is a malignant lesion. And then mucosal based with clinico-radiological inputs, we can call it a sarcomatoid squamous carcinoma. Okay, so now coming on to another category of squamous carcinomas, a recently subclassified category of squamous carcinomas, which look a little different and behave also a little different, and that is why there is a need to pick these up in every case possible. So this is the case of a 40-year-old male non-smoker with a right-sided neck mass. On examination, he was also found to have a right-sided tonsillar mass, and he had right level 2 lymph nodal mass, which is the right-sided neck mass. Biopsy was done from the tonsillar lesion. And look at what you are seeing. You are seeing cords and proliferation of cords of these cells, which look like as if only the basal layer. It looks like a superficial biopsy where it seems as if you've got the basal layer in biopsy and the superficial layers have been cut out in some way. You just see those regimented, palisaded type of basal layer of the squamous epithelium, and you do not see any other layer. You do not see keratin, much keratin, you just see some individual cells showing this deep eosinophilic type cytoplasm, and then this very blue looking proliferation of this layer which appears to be the basal layer. Of course, you know that this is not only the surface, because you see it infiltrating deep into the underlying stroma. So you know that this is a malignant lesion which has some squamous differentiation in the form of only individual cells showing you keratinization, and the entire tumor looking blue and looking like the basal layer of normal squamous epithelium, or the reticular layer, the tonsillar epithelium. And this is the IHC which will help you clinch your diagnosis. This is the P16 immunohistochemistry. This is clone E6H4, which is the FDA approved clone. And at least 70% strong nuclear and cytoplasmic. You need both. It is not either and or no. It is and. So you need to have nuclear and cytoplasmic positivity, and you can see the inset shows you the diffuse positivity of this P16 immunohistochemistry in this. So this blue looking basal layer like looking tumor in the oropharyngeal region, tonsil is part of the oropharynx. So this oropharyngeal region with only individual cell keratinization, largely non-keratinizing, will diffuse P16 IHC positivity in both nuclear and cytoplasmic location up to 70% or more, is what is the HPV mediated oropharyngeal cancer, which is a new chapter in the current AJCC 8th edition. And what is the biology of this tumor? It happens in younger patients. It happens in patients with high risk sexual behavior, often with no significant smoking or alcohol use history, with cystic neck nodal metastasis. That is very common in these patients, that they present with nodal metastasis, and sometimes the nodal metastasis is the only presentation, and there is actually no oropharyngeal mass even after investigating for the same. And importance of recognizing these tumors is that improved overall survival at 3 years as compared to the HPV negative oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas. They have a better prognosis than the HPV negative oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas. If these lesions are limited in their extent, robotic surgeries are now being preferred to remove whatever of the tumor there is, which actually improves survival in these patients. De-escalation therapies, reduce dose, radiation dose and chemotherapy dose are also being tried. However, the trials which have been conducted till now have not shown benefits of reduced intensity radiotherapy or chemotherapy in these patients. However, everybody in the medical fraternity and pathology fraternity realizes that these tumors look different and they behave different and in an indolent fashion as compared to the non-HPV positive oropharyngeal carcinomas, which are highly aggressive neoplasms. And this is the TNM of this tumor, and please note that this TNM is different from the TNM of oral and oral cavity squamous carcinomas, which includes lip and tongue as well. And this is a separate, the HPV mediated oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas have their own specific TNM which has to be followed while looking at these tumors, hence the importance of diagnosing them. And if you see the nodal metastatic criteria, till now we do not know the importance of extranodal extension in the nodal metastasis of these tumors, and that does not figure in the nodal staging of these tumors till now. And it is something that is being collected by the AJCC community to know the extranodal extension importance of in HPV mediated oropharyngeal cancers. What is important for histopathologists to pick up are, as I showed you, these individual cells with keratin, with pink cytoplasm, this look which appears like as if this is only the basal layer of the epithelium which is proliferating and the maturation is no longer there. These are the pink cells which are present, individually keratinized cells in the epithelium. And this is what is characteristically known as the invert keratinization pattern. This is usually non-keratinizing. Frank tumor keratinization is very, very uncommon and almost unacceptable for these tumors. As I said, there can be some focal keratinization can be there, and then you can have these sheets of blue appearing basal cell appearing tumors. And this is the P16, which is diffusely and brilliantly positive in both the nuclear and the cytoplasmic locations. please be aware of the fact that these do not always look low grade on histology. In fact, quite the opposite. They can look quite high grade. They can have necrosis. They can have lot of mitosis and apoptotic activity. However, the indolent behavior is not guided by the morphology of these lesions, and across the board till now their behavior is indolent, except for cases which are showing overt anaplasia. And there are cases like that in which you have tumor giant cells and overt anaplasia. Only those are the cases in which there are early reports which say that those tumors may not behave that well. And you see the P16, brilliantly positive P16 in both the nuclear and cytoplasmic locations in these tumors. But is the picture always so rosy that you think it is in the oropharyngeal location? You just do the P16 and then you get your answer. No, it is not. And then you see some kind of these tumors which are looking basal, as if the basal layer is proliferating, as I'm saying. They have these smudgy nuclei scattered, maybe some invert keratinization in the form of some scattered pink cells. However, the P16 is very patchy. It is nuclear and cytoplasmic, but in this, at least in this biopsy, is just hardly 20% or 25% of the area of the tumor. So these are to be reported as equivocal. This is equivocal for P16, and this would be called HPV-mediated oropharyngeal squamous carcinoma based on this. And look at this. Okay, here again you see those pink cells, beautiful invert keratinization like pattern, and again no overt keratinization seen, and then proliferation of these very round, very blue, very very high NC ratio appearing cells like the basal layer. However, if you look at the P16 closely, on low power, it looks like it is diffusely positive. But if you see, is there 70% nuclear as well as cytoplasmic? No, there isn't. The nuclear positivity is only to the tune of 25 to 30%. The rest of it is only cytoplasmic positivity, and that is why this case also will not fit into the criteria of being a P16 positive HPV-mediated oropharyngeal carcinoma on morphology and immunohistochemistry alone. And the P16 here will have to be reported as equivocal, and this case needs to be referred for HPV genotyping studies. So what are the recommendations presently for human papilloma virus testing or P16? All oropharyngeal primaries have to be tested. As I said, P16 IHC has to be 70% nuclear and cytoplasmic positivity. Additional HPV testing may be done at the discretion of the pathologist and not treating clinician, is what the current CAP says. And patients with metastatic squamous carcinoma of unknown primary in the cervical, upper or mid jugular up to level 2 have to be tested with P16, especially if they have non-keratinizing histology. So these are the so all oropharyngeal and metastatic lymph nodes or CUP cases presenting as carcinoma of unknown primary till the upper jugular nodes or level 2 lymph nodes have to be thought of and treated and tested for P16 immunohistochemistry. If positive for P16 immunohistochemistry, upper nodal metastasis is positive for P16, is non-keratinizing in histology, even if we do not have an oropharyngeal primary, it will still be treated as a TX oropharynx with nodal positivity. So it will be treated as an oropharyngeal primary, and the radiotherapist will cover the oropharyngeal region in the radiation treatment. And that is the importance of doing the P16 immunohistochemistry in upper jugular neck nodal metastasis, which are predominantly non-keratinizing. So is this the only variant of human papilloma virus related tumor in the head and neck, that is the squamous carcinoma that arises in the oropharyngeal region? No, as this is mainly a disease of the Western countries. There the oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas, HPV mediated, comprise 80% of all oropharyngeal carcinomas, and it is a little different for our Indian scenario. I'll come to it a little later, but I must inform you that there are multiple morphological variants of HPV related carcinomas that have come from the Western literature. So of course it is the classical squamous cell carcinoma, and then there is HPV related squamous cell carcinoma with spindle or sarcomatoid features, HPV related squamous cell carcinoma with papillary features, HPV related lymphoepithelial carcinoma of the oropharynx. And this is very important here because these tumors you will have to test for with P16 as well as EBV. So here your differential might be that it might be a nasopharyngeal undifferentiated squamous carcinoma, undifferentiated carcinoma, and that is why these tumors have to be tested with both P16 as well as EBV. Then HPV associated adenocarcinoma of base of tongue, very rare, only a handful of cases have been reported. HPV related small cell, large cell neuroendocrine carcinomas of the head and neck. These are again very rare, however important, because these two tumors have do not have the good prognostic effect of HPV. So if you're diagnosing these small cell and large cell neuroendocrine, which are diffusely P16 positive and HPV related, then you know that these are not the good behaving, or these are not going to behave better than their non-HPV counterparts. HPV related carcinoma with adenoid cystic like features, and we'll talk about it a little later, and a ciliated HPV related carcinoma, which usually or may present as neck nodal metastasis and may be the differential diagnosis of a branchial cleft cyst. And that is why, but this is a carcinoma, so that is why the differentiation has to be made between the two using P16 immunohistochemistry and the morphological features of infiltrating carcinoma features. And this is a very good paper published by Dr. Bishop in Virchow's archive in 2017, which details important points and differential diagnosis of all these variants of HPV related carcinomas, and I recommend all of you to read this. So let's talk a little about HPV, P16 and head and neck cancer. Oropharynx and sinonasal tract are the current hotspots. Larynx is emerged as the next. So keep your eyes open for these kind of P16 positive tumors in these three sites: P16 positive and HPV mediated. Do not call them poorly differentiated. They are not poorly differentiated. HPV, like in the cervix, here also the pathogenesis of HPV is to stop maturation. So that is why I've been continuously trying to draw your attention to the fact that these look like as if just the basal layer is proliferating and the top layers have not formed. And that is why they are not poorly differentiated. There is a lack of differentiation. Do not call basaloid, because then the confusion arises with basaloid squamous cell carcinomas, which are mimickers of adenoid cystic, are common in the parapharyngeal region, and are very, very high grade neoplasms. They are amongst the worst prognostic of the squamous carcinomas. So do not call them basaloid as well. Focal anaplasia is common. Diffuse anaplasia is a bad sign. They overall have a better prognosis except for the subtypes I told you. As I said, lymphoepithelial carcinomas have to be tested for both HPV and EBV. P16 expression with prototypical HPV related morphology is sufficient to diagnose it as HPV related. And we'll learn a little more about this. Small cell and large cell, I've talked about that. So what should we do? What do we mean by when can we rely on P16 and when can we not? So P16 positive, if overtly keratinizing either oropharynx or nodes, diffusely, no matter how much is your P16, you cannot call it HPV mediated in your bottom line in your diagnosis. You have to say that if P16 is positive, but because the tumor is overtly keratinizing, this needs to be tested with HPV genotyping studies for confirmation of its HPV mediated status. Upper jugular nodes, non-keratinizing histology, treat as P16 positive, treat as oropharyngeal primary. Whether or not an oropharyngeal primary is found, this is the situation in which P16 is a harbinger of HPV mediated nature, and these are the tumors which have to be treated as oropharyngeal tumors metastatic to the node. All the variant morphologies which are described and branchial cleft cysts if you are suspecting, then because branchial cleft cysts, as I said, can also be P16 positive. If your differential is with the branchial cleft cyst or you have a variant morphology, HPV genotyping is essential, and to call it an HPV mediated tumor. What if your P16 is negative? Can it still be HPV mediated? Yes. If you have classical histology of HPV mediated oropharyngeal carcinoma and your P16 is negative, you can go ahead and do an HPV genotyping to prove that this is an HPV mediated cancer. And as I said, it has therapeutic and prognostic importance and it's worthwhile doing it. And otherwise, has to be labeled as P16 negative oropharyngeal carcinoma, non-HPV mediated. What is the HPV genotyping method recommended? It is HPV RNA in situ hybridization, which is the CAP recommended confirmation test for HPV mediated status of these tumors. However, we Indians tend to, beg to differ or tend to differ in a lot of situations, and this is one of them. So here also, our scenario is a little different than the Westerners, and as I said in initial this thing only, that the data mostly has come from the Western world, and our scenario of HPV related squamous carcinomas is a little different. And what we saw in our center was that there is a low prevalence of P16 positivity overall. HPV mediated cancers do not comprise more than 10 to 15% of our oropharyngeal cancer population. Dual HPV and P16 positivity was seen only in 40%. And that indicates that there is a low utility of P16 as a surrogate for HPV, especially in the background of high tobacco burden in our population, and that is why we may be missing or possibly overdiagnosing some of the HPV mediated cancers in our population. But please keep the young patient, cystic nodal neck nodal metastasis, non-smoker, and has sexual behavior clinical picture into account also when you're thinking of an HPV mediated coupled with P16. And in Indian scenario, as the CAP said, that it is a discretion of the pathologist when they feel that they need HPV genotyping. In the Indian scenario, maybe it will be worthwhile to go ahead and test with HPV genotyping tests as well. Now we are talking HPV, so let's finish HPV. What else can be HPV? So this is just to show you, and I think you've seen this case earlier in an earlier presentation as well. So I will go over it quickly. This is a 48-year-old lady with intermittent episodes of epistaxis 4 months back. And this is a mass in the nasal cavity. So we are out of the oropharynx region, and as I told you, the other hub of HPV mediated cancers is the sinonasal region, and this is the sinonasal or a nasal cavity mass in this 48-year-old lady. And this is the picture that you have seen before. It has this very, very adenoid cystic like appearance. However, it shows you this kind of a surface colonization, which is very unusual for an adenoid cystic. However, these areas look very, very, very adenoid cystic. On higher power, however, the characteristic luminal and abluminal differentiation of adenoid cystic is not there. And what you see are these cells which are uniform, have little pleomorphism, and have these multitude of microcystic spaces. No overt keratinization seen in this case or any glandular differentiation. And yet, there were other areas which were more solid and had increased mitotic areas. So of course, then differential between adenoid cystic and adenoid cystic with high grade transformation and this entity. And as we can see that adenoid cystic gets ruled out, the CKIT is negative, CK7 is patchy, there is no abluminal or luminal differentiation, and P40 is diffusely positive, and P16 immunohistochemistry is what clinches this diagnosis, because no adenoid cystic will be like this, but this tumor is P16 positive in every single cell. Here the criteria of 70% does not apply. And according to Dr. Bishop, who has actually described these tumors, he says P16 ideally every single cell, at least 95%. Every single cell positive P16, and then we confirm the HPV status in this case by this positivity for HPV 52. And this is a HPV related multiphenotypic sinonasal carcinomas. This was described and published by Dr. Bishop. What is the importance of knowing this lesion? Considering the fact, one is that it very closely resembles adenoid cystic carcinomas. It presents as a large destructive sinonasal mass with high-grade histological features. It is multiphenotypic, squamous, chondroid, sarcomatous, and Auschwitz differentiation have been described, and that is why the term multiphenotypic. As I said, for diagnosis, every single cell has to be P16 positive. This kind of positivity is not seen in adenoid cystic carcinomas. No matter how, I showed you an area with sheet-like proliferation of cells, but paradoxically, it has an indolent behavior. And it has to be distinguished from true adenoid cystic carcinomas, squamous cell carcinomas, and many other histological mimickers. Now coming to another area where of head and neck tumors, which is the salivary gland tumors, which occur in the major salivary glands. This is a 40-year-old woman with a parotid swelling, and as you can see within the parotid, there is a large cystic lesion with proliferation of some cells. On high power, you can see these proliferation of very monotonous appearing cells and a lot of these eosinophilic, amphiphilic cytoplasm with lot of multicystic spaces, and of course there are large cystic areas as well within these tumors. On higher power, it just seems as if, it looks like as if acinic cell carcinoma has lost its granules. You have that similar multicystic change, you have these large cells with eosinophilic cytoplasm, but there are no typical those zymogen granules. So that is what this was initially called also for a long time. But now realize that it is CK7 positive, mammoglobin positive, and it is a secretory carcinoma, initially called as mammary Allenhog secretory carcinoma, but now known as secretory carcinoma. It is locally invasive, and it is characterized by the CTV6 NTRK3 fusion oncoprotein. NTRK3 is now available as an immunohistochemical marker, which is pretty sensitive and specific to diagnose this tumor. And as I said, it is a differential. It was in initial reports, it was known as a zymogen poor acinic cell carcinoma, and it shares its histology, IHC genetic features with secretory carcinomas of the breast. And this is the typical acinic cell carcinoma, just to show you the difference. The blue color, the zymogenic granules, similar microcystic spaces, and a beautiful dog1 positivity, which is this luminal appearing, these almost these microcystic like spaces which are positive for this dog1. And this is the classical positivity you see in acinic cell carcinomas. And you need to differentiate these two tumors. Acinic cell carcinoma is much more indolent. And this is another salivary gland tumor which is announcing its arrival on its own. You can see that it is showing that its malignant features even on low power. You have cells which have pleomorphism, comedonecrosis is apparent. It has this oncocytic, or you can say a little more apocrine look, and at places somebody can say that at places it looks like as if you're looking at a ductal carcinoma high grade inside the breast in comedonecrosis like pattern. Hyper to show that obvious malignant cells, some oncocytic nature, and comedonecrosis extensive. And this is what this tumor is positive for, CK7, and diffusely positive for androgen receptor, and HER2 immunohistochemistry positive in up to 30% of cases. Androgen receptor is what helps you clinch this diagnosis along with CK7 positivity. This tumor is commonly seen as carcinoma X pleomorphic adenoma and must be thought of. It may be intracapsular, extracapsular minimally invasive, or widely invasive in those cases, and has to be reported as such. In small biopsies, it can also happen in minor salivary regions, and in small biopsies can very closely mimic squamous carcinomas, and as this tumor can also have squamous differentiation and can be P40 positive. So this is a salivary duct carcinoma, just to show you the immune. It is also GCDF3 positive. Coming to yet another subsite in the head and neck region. Dr. Nadeem, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'll continue. So coming to yet another subsite in head and neck. Hello? Yeah. Hello? Yes, I can hear you. Hello? Okay, so I'll continue with another subsite in head and neck, which is thyroid.
Hello,
and
can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you, Dr. Nadeem. Yes.
Yeah, tell me, please.
Yeah. So how am I on time?
Absolutely, for first class. Please go ahead, no issues.
Okay, thank you.
Perfectly fine.
So,
Nice.
so talking about thyroid, I've just outlined some very, very clinically relevant and important scenarios where immunohistochemistry can save the day for you in thyroid pathology. And let's look at some of these situations. So this is a case of a 19-year-old girl with left-sided neck swelling. On ultrasound, there was a nodule in the thyroid. FNA done outside was reported as papillary thyroid carcinoma, Bethesda category 6. A total thyroidectomy was done for her based on that. So look at this tumor. So what is this? Beautiful papillary architecture, and somehow we pathologists tend to do that. when we look at a follicular neoplasm in the thyroid, all our antennas and brain is, charged up. We have so many differentials. We are trying to think, is it FVPC? Is it follicular variant of papillary carcinoma? Is it follicular carcinoma? Does it have Hurdle cell change? Are we looking at a follicular adenoma? But the more we see papillary architecture in thyroid, somehow our brain goes to sleep because we have only one diagnosis ringing in our mind. That is a papillary thyroid carcinoma. And we forget that there are 13 variants of papillary thyroid carcinoma which have been put there for a reason and are important, and it is important to subclassify the patient in one of these variants as far as possible. And this is a case just to highlight that point, that what you see here definitely is papillary architecture. Though majority of the tumor does not seem to have this architecture, it seems like it is having follicles, or maybe follicles, and some follicles which are just they have too many cells. Almost this is like an area which you call as cribriform, and I'll show you more pictures. Moreover, the insect shows you a beautiful picture of a classical PTC, where even in this power, the power in these cases is different. But even in this power, you can see multiple nuclear inclusions and the clearing of the nuclei apparent at even the lowest of powers. However, when you see here, the nuclei are regimented and appear to be hyperchromatic rather than being clear. The classical sign of a PTC that all of us for generations have been taught. But this does not have those nuclei. This has this blue nuclei which appear to be elongated and regimented in some form. Yet another picture to show you the cribriform architecture that can be found in these tumors. It can be focal, like I showed you in this case, and very diffuse, where you feel that okay, you are seeing some papillae here and there, projecting into the lumen, but most of the tumor is not even follicular, is more cribriform, as if the follicles and the papillae have collapsed together. And look at the blueness. Do you see any nuclear features of papillary here? Can you even imagine anything like this in this picture? No, there are no areas which are showing you papillary thyroid nuclear features. So when you look at a tumor like this, no matter how much papillary architecture you have, think a little further. Think a little further, because this diagnosis is of utmost importance to the patients. Look a little further, and as I said, the cribriform architecture, the regimented nuclei, the blue appearing nuclei, the nuclei which look like tubular adenomas. So in terms of variants of the usual variants of the commoner variants of thyroid pathology or papillary thyroid carcinoma, this is resembling the columnar cell histology, in which you have long columns, you have columns, some cribriform architecture, but you even have columns, and it does not have the nuclear features of papillary, which differentiates it from the tall cell variant, which will have classical of papillary with column. So this is like columnar cell. But in addition to the columnar cells, this tumor also has these. And these are just groups of small cells, a rounded collection of small cells, which are called as morules. And please note that these are not squamoid. Squamous morules is a very common feature of classical PTC. These are not squamous morules. And this is just another picture to highlight the blueness of these nuclei, the lack of papillary features, and some morules scattered throughout the tumor. And on immunohistochemistry, it is only when you suspect this on morphology that you look at these columnar histology. Do not get carried away by the papillary architecture. Look at the columnar histology, find the morules and see that they are non-squamous morules. Will you put the relevant immunohistochemical markers, which in this case will be a beta-catenin. The beta-catenin IHC in this case is diffuse nuclear and cytoplasmic positive and loses the characteristic membranous positivity that you will see in all other thyroid tumors, and this is what clinches the diagnosis of a cribriform morular variant of papillary thyroid carcinoma. As you can see, these cells are TTF1 positive. They didn't look like papillary thyroid, but they are TTF1 positive. The morules are positive for CD10 and they're negative for P40. And that is why they are not squamous morules. They are not the squamous morules that you see in PTC. But it is the beta-catenin IHC which helps you make this diagnosis. Also, you can take the help of ER and PR, which are diffusely estrogen receptor and progesterone receptor, which are diffusely positive in this tumor. Cribriform morular variant of papillary thyroid carcinoma. Now, why am I insisting on diagnosing this entity so much? Why? Because it is rare but also under-recognized. And this tumor is associated with familial adenomatous polyposis in more than 50% cases. And the thyroid precedes the FAP symptoms in up to 50% or even more cases. So if you pick up this tumor at the thyroid stage, then the colonic polyps can be picked up at the polyp stage, and these do not progress to carcinomas. And a total proctocolectomy done at that stage can be life-saving for patients who have this variant of papillary thyroid carcinoma. So we had one case in a male patient as well. So while usual PTCs have a 3:1 female is to male ratio, this has 33:1, and only 4 male patients have been reported in this world. But we have seen it in a male patient also. So please, gender also does not make you think that okay, it's a male gender, so we cannot diagnose this entity. It's not like that. It is rarer in males, but it does occur. And as I said, early detection of FAP is life-saving. This is amongst the CMV PTC per se is amongst the best prognostic tumors and best prognostic subtypes of PTC. However, like all good things come with a condition. The condition, the bad condition, the poor condition in this case is the associated familial adenomatous polyposis. Please pick up these lesions so that the patient's life can be saved. This is a 25, coming on to the next case. 25-year-old woman with a 3 centimeter mass in the right lobe of thyroid. We had blocked for review from hemithyroidectomy specimen. Submitting diagnosis from outside laboratory was papillary thyroid carcinoma. And this is what the tumor looks like. It was a nicely circumscribed tumor, and it had these clusters of cells in follicular arrangement with nuclear features which are very classical of papillary thyroid carcinoma. In fact, they're so classical and they're so common in these that almost every cell seems to have these nuclear features of papillary thyroid carcinoma. But what is odd about this tumor? What troubles you when you look at this tumor? You see very classical, and if you get carried away by the nuclear features, you are going to call this one of the variants, a follicular variant of papillary thyroid carcinoma. But when you go ahead and try to call it that, then you try to look for the follicular architecture. Where are the follicles? They seem to be just some kind of proliferation, irregular proliferation of these cells, which appear to be twisting on each other. It is like how we wring the clothes when we have to dry them. It is something like that. These cells are being ringed. They're in all kinds of directions. And what is making them go this haphazard is this pale eosinophilic bright, this homogeneous eosinophilic bright material which is separating out these clusters of cells, which you don't see. It is more on the left lower hand side corner in this picture. And this is not something that you see in any of the follicular variants of PTC that you have seen, or even in classical PTCs. And then you do not have any nuclear features to suggest no increase in mitosis, no necrosis, very bland looking cells, and this classical appearance of twisted follicles, and with nuclear features of PTC which are very easily detectable. When you have something like this and this kind of hyalinization, then please think of a hyalinizing trabecular tumor, which recently has been described to have rearrangement, the GLIS rearrangement of its own. And that is why this is and this patient, this is the new molecular signature in this tumor. However, the importance is that this patient does not need a total thyroidectomy in this situation. This tumor, once resected, is enough. That is enough treatment. No radioiodine therapy and no further total thyroidectomy to be done for this patient. The hemi is enough as a treatment. And this hyalinizing trabecular tumor, what on IHC is there an immunohistochemical marker which will help you diagnose this? And you will be surprised that what helps you in these cases is a Ki67 or a MIB1 stain. I'm sorry, I don't have a picture, but MIB1 stain, rather than being a nuclear positive, MIB1 shows diffuse cytoplasmic positivity in this tumor, and that is what helps you clinch your diagnosis. Diffuse cytoplasmic MIB positivity, which is not seen in any other tumor, is the hallmark of hyalinizing trabecular tumor, not called as hyalinizing trabecular adenoma. Now it is called as HTT or hyalinizing trabecular tumor because of uncertain behavior in certain cases. And this this is one situation which again is very, very important in thyroid pathology. So this is 72-year-old male, rapidly enlarging thyroid mass over 3 months. No stridor at presentation. And this is a biopsy, so it's a solid lesion, and now our clinicians do from solid thyroid masses a diagnostic biopsy, especially because the clinical picture suggests a particular diagnosis. And I'm sure that all the diagnosis is ringing in everybody's mind, and the diagnosis is an anaplastic thyroid. You can see that this case does not resemble any of the regular run-of-the-mill thyroid tumors. The cells are pleomorphic, though at places they look plasmacytoid, but they're sufficiently pleomorphic with prominence of nucleoli, and they have a very scattered appearance. And that is why this and there are mitoses. So everyone with this history, rapidly enlarging thyroid mass, no stridor at presentation. And this is what happens, that this case also was diagnosed as anaplastic thyroid carcinoma from outside, and this patient was almost being sent home as considering him as an inoperable case and a palliative therapy. But please look carefully. What do you see here? You see these cells, definitely they are pleomorphic, but they are very discrete. And what are these? These are something that you see in your smears. So here comes the importance of also having a good look at your cytology cases. So these are something that you see on cytology, and these small dots are what you call as lymphoglandular bodies, which you see in your smears. If I made a smear from this, I'm sure it will be full of these lymphoglandular, these wisps or small dots of cytoplasm, these small pieces of cytoplasm which are rounded, and they're scattered throughout this lesion. And there is a discreteness to this tumor. A1A3 is negative, which can be for majority of your anaplastic. That does not help you differentiate it from an anaplastic from any other differential, but it definitely rules out your other thyroid neoplasm, the classical thyroid. And Paxate is positive, and that is also very well known about anaplastic thyroid, that if it is positive for any marker in thyroid lineage, then it is positive for Paxate. And that is where IHC ditches you sometime, and you need to know your work and your cases well. It is Paxate positive, A1A3 negative, classical IHC for anaplastic, bad looking tumor with pleomorphic cells. Why am I fussing over this so much? Because this is what the IHC, further immunohistochemistry revealed in this case. This tumor is diffusely positive for CD20. This is a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma of the thyroid, a completely treatable. From a palliative care patient who was sent home to die, this is a patient who's been on follow-up and is fine. This is a CD20, which is diffusely positive. This is diffuse large B-cell lymphoma of the thyroid and not an anaplastic thyroid carcinoma. Anaplastic thyroid carcinoma is a death sentence. It is a very bad tumor, and that is why every treatable cause must be thought of and ruled out, especially a lymphoma. And I've seen this a couple of cases like this, which were called as anaplastic just based on the clinical history and the presentation of a rapidly enlarging thyroid mass, but were actually treatable B-cell lymphomas of the thyroid. So please, I would even go ahead and say, you would not find it in books. This is this thing, that before you call it anaplastic, if your keratins are negative, before you call it anaplastic, just think of lymphoma. And if the morphology allows, please do your basic lymphoma markers to rule out this treatable cause of a thyroid mass. Now coming to sinonasal round blue cell tumors, you've heard a lot about these, but my presentation would be incomplete if I do not talk about them, because here the role of immunohistochemistry in head and neck is the maximum. So we know that here the site doesn't help. The areas are so small. Every tumor present here, there are a huge amount of tumors which happen here, and all of them involve all the sites in sinonasal. Radiology doesn't help. They're all expanding masses, mostly T3 and T4 at presentation, involving all the sinuses, nasal mass, ethmoid mass, sphenoid mass. And symptomatology doesn't help. Either the patient presents with nasal blockade, or if it goes into the orbit, then some kind of visual disturbance. And they're all keratin and neuroendocrine positive. This also, please remember that all your sinonasal round blue cell tumors are positive to for keratin and neuroendocrine. And this I say regardless of their origin, whether they're epithelial, whether they're mesenchymal, whether they're melanomas, they're all positive for keratins and neuroendocrine markers. And that is because of pluripotency of the sinonasal region tissue as such. And the tumors arising from that region may be even different from their counterparts in other sites of the body. So as I said, always remember the previous case also showed you, and this case also showed you, that infidelity is the golden rule of immunohistochemistry. You cannot diagnose a tumor only by immunohistochemical. If I don't show you the morphology, you will not be able to say just based on immunohistochemical markers in most of the cases, because immunohistochemistry is common between so many tumors. And as similar situation, sinonasal masses, all these kind of age group, young, more common in males, and all pathological doppelgangers. As you can see, all these tumors look similar, and you've seen these tumors in the previous talk, so I'll go over them very quickly. So this was a nasal mass, A1, A3 synapto, as I said, keratin, neuroendocrine, but positive for desmin, myogenin. So this is a CD56 is always positive, MYC2 is negative, dot-like, and you can sometimes see the rhabdomyoblastic cells here. So this is a rhabdomyosarcoma of the sinonasal region. Please remember that this happens in the young patients, but there is a second peak of rhabdomyosarcomas in elderly 6th and 7th decade patients, because that is where it usually gets missed and gets diagnosed as a sinonasal neuroendocrine tumors, because you will not think of a rhabdomyosarcoma usually in that age group. Always include desmin in your panel of sinonasal markers. 35 male nasal mass, very poor undifferentiated looking cells, but suddenly decides to show squamous differentiation. And this is a nut carcinoma, positive for A1H3, P40, and nut, previously known as nut midline carcinoma. And this is a tumor, again, very, very undifferentiated cells. Somehow this pinkness of the cytoplasm is what catches your attention on low power, and you will have scattered cells which are showing eccentric pink cytoplasm, giving a typical rhabdoid histology. Must look for them, they are diagnostic. And then you can think of the markers to put. A1, A3, P16 can be positive, it's a pitfall. Remember that INI deficient can be positive for P16, even more than 70% case. Tumor cells, nuclear and cytoplasmic. And INI1 is beautifully lost, and your internal control here, the nuclei of the lymphocytes, the endothelial cells confirm that yes, INI1 is, your IHC has worked and your tumor has lost in INI1, or is a SWE/SNF pathway rearranged tumor. So this is the INI1 deficient or SMARCB1 deficient sinonasal carcinoma, a very aggressive tumor, and diagnosis of this indicates that the patient must receive a multimodality therapy, almost a trimodality therapy with the as early as possible, and even then most of these patients succumb to disease within 2 years. Another tumor, similar looking blue, but you see that this tumor has a monomorphism on its own, and there is this paleness to its nuclei, and they're just in these huge clusters. Again, keratin and P40 diffusely positive, but this case is also MYC2 diffusely positive, and this is the adamantinoma like Ewing's family of tumor. Again, the therapy is different and must be diagnosed. MYC2 is what will help you diagnose, and EWSR1 rearrangement on molecular studies. And this is the other case, SNUC. When you've ruled out all the others, CK7, only keratin positivity, P63, if at all, is very focal. Then think of sinonasal undifferentiated. This is not a wastebasket. More than 70% of these cases are showing IDH-R2 mutations, and that can be used as an immunohistochemistry for diagnosis. IDH-R132 IHC, and that has a therapeutic counter as well, which is commonly used in brain gliomas and is now being tried in these tumors. So that is why diagnosis of this entity has a clinically valid meaning, and that is why it must not be missed or must not be used as a waste basket. Then again, this is neuroendocrine marker and keratin. Please remember, cyanonasal neuroendocrine tumors are diffusely positive for keratin, unlike, and they're positive for keratins like carcinomas, not like neuroendocrine tumors in other sites of the body, where you'll see very dot-like focal keratin positivity. These are diffuse, strong positive for keratins. And out of this group has now come the new category, which is the SMARCA4 deficient carcinomas of the sinusal region. And if you have that immunohistochemistry, you can diagnose that entity. So as has been highlighted in previous presentations, sinonasal tumors means an panel approach. You can use mnemonics, or you can use, you do whatever, have a panel, just based on morphology, you cannot diagnose these tumors in most of the cases, and you will miss some of the entities which has a therapeutic. And this is the panel which I have highlighted. You can cut out on some markers in the initial panel, but I feel that most of them, actually all of them, are necessary to actually clinch a diagnosis in sinonasal region. So as I'm not, it is not an interactive session, so I've just given away the title of the next topic, but it is epithelial to mesenchymal. Let's talk about a few spindle cell lesions. So though this would have been interesting to ask in an interactive session, so this is one of the very common, it is a pitfall, not really common, but when this tumor, happens, then it is usually misdiagnosed, and if it is not thought of. So this is a 55-year-old male with nasopharyngeal mass, and as you can all see that we'll all first think of an undifferentiated nasopharyngeal carcinoma. Though there is this anisonucleosis, and there are sheets, and there are a lot of lymphocytic infiltrate, all of which are classically present even in nasopharyngeal. So there's no reason to think of something else. Yet another area in this tumor to show you these epithelioid to spindle cells with lot of lymphocytic infiltrate in between, and no obvious differentiation, or no obvious any other significant findings. Another hyper view to show you that the cells are pleomorphic with lot of lymphocytes as if they're sitting in the cytoplasm of these cells. Focal necrosis in some of the cases. And this is the A1, A3, which is positive, very strong, but the 40 is negative. So if a nasopharyngeal carcinoma is negative for P40, I will think of an alternative diagnosis. That is what should be done. P40 is universally positive, mostly positive nasopharyngeal, squamous undifferentiated nasopharyngeal carcinomas, and this case was negative. And that goes, makes you go thinking that what else can it be? And then when you go back on your morphology, you see these classically pleomorphic cells, some of them having these, smudgy, at places vesicular nuclei. A very clear vesicular nuclei has also been described in these cases, and a lot of lymphocytic infiltration in between them. And then these are the two golden markers which will help you diagnose this, and this is CD23 and D240. So this is a follicular dendritic cell carcinoma which presents in the oropharynx, which presents in the nasopharynx, which presents as carcinoma of unknown primary as a neck mass, and gets misdiagnosed as a metastatic, undifferentiated, poorly differentiated carcinoma all the time. And this is a sarcoma which is to be treated differently. It is to be resected and then backed up with RT if at all required based on the margins, and not treated like with chemotherapy like a carcinoma of unknown primary, which it will anyway not respond to. FASN and other specific markers are also available for diagnosis as IHC. So this is a paper by Dr. Bill, and this is the maximum number of cases that have been reported of this entity. And as I said, these are the common sites. Local recurrence rates are 23 to 43%, metastasis rates 21%, mortality 3 to 7%. So it is in the realm of low, and if you're using a 3-tier system, then a low to intermediate sarcoma. Again, another important mesenchymal tumor. There are a lot of them. You've heard some of them in the previous presentations, but this is something that is not overlapping with the previous presentations, and this is being increasingly diagnosed all over the body, especially head and neck. So I just wanted to introduce you, or just update you that this happens in the head and neck region as well. This was a young male who presented with these multiple fleshy lesions involving skin of the scalp. And this is the clinical picture which shows you that this is, these are multiple fleshy, some ulcerated, and some at the root of the nose, and then here on the forehead, and then some on the scalp. And these from an outside biopsy didn't call as sarcoma, leiomyosarcoma, which means that an extensive resection of this will have to take place, and the patient will also have to undergo adjuvant radiation therapy. So let's look at the histology. On histology, it is not involving the overlying, it is just below the overlying epidermis, appears relatively circumscribed and very pink, pale appearing tumor. And here you see, oh wow, it looks really myeloid. Yes, it looks really myeloid, and somebody probably has made the right diagnosis. Except when you go to different areas of the tumor and at places you feel that, oh, this is more rhabdomyoblastic here, or this is more skeletal muscle-like. And then here it actually becomes rhabdoid with these eosinophilic inclusions and these eccentrically placed nuclei. And then here it looks like myeloid, like smooth muscle. This actually looks like a leiomyoma of the, uterus. And this is what myeloid looking, very, very myeloid looking cells. And at places it becomes epithelioid. So it has the characteristics of all the bad tumors in the head and in the body, and yet in all the pictures that I showed you, there was no necrosis and there was hardly any mitosis. These cells per se are large, but they are not showing you any overt anaplasia or increase in atypium. So this is what is the panel for this case, and this is what will clinch your diagnosis, and this is what this entity is. This tumor is diffusely keratin positive. It is diffusely positive for vascular markers CD31 and ERG, which is the diagnostic marker, and also positive for FLI1. This is a vascular or a hemangioendothelial tumor which looks pseudomyogenic or myogenic or pseudomyogenic on high power, and also resembles epithelioid sarcoma on low power. So putting 2 and 2 together, this is the relatively newly described pseudomyogenic epithelioid sarcoma like hemangioendothelioma. It can come as a soft tissue lesion as the body, and now even being described in bone. Lot of cases are being reported from the head and neck region. Clinically, morphologically, it will resemble sarcomas. Be very worried. Think about this case. Never forget the sine qua non of malignancies. Sarcomas will have atypical mitosis, which will have infiltration, which will have overt anaplasias in most situations. So never forget the basics. And this is what this tumor teaches you again and again, that this is a sheep in a wolf's clothing. This tumor just needs local resection. There is no role of any adjuvant therapy here. It, if at all, will recur locally, which can again be addressed with local treatment. And otherwise, this tumor is good enough with only resection. And these are the different histological variations that have been reported, and it has a molecular signature. And this FOSB, because of the molecular signature, the FOSB has been developed into an immunohistochemistry and is now available as a marker. So with this, I come to the end of my presentation. I hope I have given you a wide variety of clinically relevant situations where immunohistochemistry can be of utmost importance in head and neck region, various pitfalls. IHC, so I will conclude by saying that IHC has a variety of roles in head and neck tumors. However, the rule prevails. What your eyes and mind don't know, IHC won't diagnose for you. Think of the possibilities, think outside the box, think what else can it be before you cut, before you cut and tailor make it into the diagnosis that you actually want to call it. P16 IHC is essential for all oropharyngeal squamous carcinomas at the moment. That is the CAP recommendation. That is important. Awareness of the entity, judicious use of immunohistochemistry are essential to recognize mimics of squamous carcinoma, which are very important to pick up. Ameloblastoma is one thing that I forgot, but ameloblastoma is again something which can, really mimic a squamous carcinoma. Think about that as well. Sinonasal round blue cell tumors need a panel of immunohistochemical markers for accurate subtyping. Your morphology will only help to a certain extent. Rest of the job has to be done by the immunohistochemistry. So make use of it. Use a panel. Don't take a very conservative approach on markers in sinonasal round blue cell tumors. And remember the important diagnostic tumors in thyroid, which have a clinical relevance and where diagnostic immunohistochemistry is available, especially anaplastic, especially thyroid lymphomas, which can look like anaplastic in biopsies. So with that, thank you all for your patient listening, and sorry to exceed the time. And I acknowledge all my patients, my residents, and my head and neck DMG colleagues, and my head and neck pathologists who have, and it's lovely to grow together, and we see all these wonderful cases and grow together with each one of them. Thank you.
Wow,
I'll
thank
stop
you so
presenting
much.
now.
Yeah, please do stop presenting. And
Yeah.
please have a glass of water. You must be tired.
I warned
I
you.
bet.
Yeah.
Wonderful presentation, Dr. Neha. Excellent presentation, I would say.
Thank you.
I mean, wonderful, absolutely amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I
Somehow
would
kind
first,
mind.
I would first read the comments and then I will come to the questions. Only then
I
you
think
will
the comments
understand,
will be stopped.
No, not at all. Let me read the comments first. So the comments
Okay.
of Dr. Chari Miglani, amazing, crisp and lucid, very well prepared presentation. Exactly what I want to say. Absolutely fantastically presented, very well prepared, beautiful, wonderful. I mean, you need a standing ovation, I would say. You have really covered every bit of it, and not only that, you have talked so much about the pitfalls, the way to differentiate, reactive lesions with malignant lesions, how the granulation tissue and the abnormal mitosis would help you out, how the KI would work out for you, where to use P16 and where not to use it. Wonderful, excellent. Dr. Rajendra Lalani says, excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Sujata Balaji, very good. Thank you. Daphne Fonseca says, excellent presentation, Dr. Neha. Thank you so much. She has a question also. I will now put the question. Have you encountered primary neuroblastoma of mandibular region? Oh, your voice is not coming. Just check your mic, please. No, I can't hear you yet. Hello? No, you are not audible. Actually, not at all. No, you are. Can you hear me? But I can't hear you. Just check your mic, whether it's plugged in or something. No, I can't hear you yet. You can do one thing, you can just log in again. No, I can't hear you.
Hello? Am I
Yeah,
audible? Am I
absolutely
audible?
clear.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
So
your
the
mic
question
also got tired.
yeah. The question was about neuroblastoma, primary of the
Primary
mandibular region.
neuroblastoma of the mandibular region. Yeah.
Yeah. So two aspects to this here. One, we have seen metastatic. So that is something that needs to be kept in mind. And I understood that with this question, probably the metastasis has to be ruled out. We have seen metastatic, we have seen neuroblastomas in adults. So the age actually does not, rule out that entity. Number two, in that situation, possibility of that being odontogenic or a adamantinoma like Ewing's is very high. That is one tumor, mandibular in origin, looking like small round cell, adamantinoma like or Ewing's primary is something that I would rule out and then go on to that diagnosis. So that is all I would like to say. But primary neuroblastomas of the mandible, have I seen? No.
First of all, it's all very good presentation. Thank you. Excellently done. So all comments across in the YouTube. Wonderfully done, Dr. Neha. There
Thank
I
you.
durust hai. Brilliant. Mashallah. Very good. Very, very
Thank
nicely done. I would request you to share your PDF. We'll put it up on we have a Google Drive where we upload all the PDF of presentations system wise. So we will do that. Right, and we will definitely request you to come back again with your gynae path knowledge. That is where we would really need you. Maybe after 2 months. You're busy, I know. So, right. Thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, Dr. Neha. God bless you. Thank you so much.
So much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So much, Dr. Nadeem. It was
Bye.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you. Bye. Take care.
Bye.